Welcome back to Shat on TV Taboo Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece for the hit FX and BBC show Taboo. I am one of your three co-hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me are my two best friends in the entire world when it comes to podcasting, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And the bearded one, Gene Lyons.
Last episode, I was just a trading company. Now I am God Almighty.
And this is our deep dive episode where we look back on this week's episode of Taboo and provide our thoughts, analysis, feedback, and the top listener emails for the week. So if you are joining us for the first time on Taboo FX, we welcome you. We thank you for checking us out. As we do with each episode, we don't go in a linear fashion. We don't do a recap of the entire plot line. We talk in buckets. An overview, we assume that you have seen the episode and are coming to us for a deeper conversation. So on this week's topics, guys, we will review episode 1, the ratings, and some news about the show. We'll dive into some new key characters that were debuted in episode 2. We'll talk about the East India Trading Company trying to kill James, definitely trying to assassinate him. James was seen paying his father's debts and buying ships and establishing a new company. We'll talk about that. We'll also dive into the American connection that James has. The Felice Adventurero. Is it the Felice Adventurero? What is Adventurero?
Felice Adventurero.
Aha. That's I think my grandparents had a car called an Adventero. Or what is it? What is it?
Adventurero.
Yeah, okay. We'll discuss the incest storyline, and then we'll also we'll end with the top emails that we received from our fans in our segment called River Rant. So that's what we've got on the topic. We like to keep our podcast to a tight 60 to 70 minutes. So without further ado, gentlemen, let's dive right in. This is the second episode of the season. Looking back, so far, gentlemen, this show seems to be a hit, similar to Westworld.
Yeah, absolutely. The numbers bear out that it's a winner. I was a little worried, honestly, after episode 1. I saw some of the feedback, and on Twitter it looked pretty strong, but the numbers don't always bear out because, if you're looking for people talking about a show, you're going to find them. I know that a lot of people I know are not back after episode 1. They just kind of did not fall in love with the show. So it's nice to see that there is an audience out there for it.
Yeah, I think good TV will find an audience. I'm shocked that you said you have people who are bailing, because the vibe I'm getting from the people that I talk with say they like it and they're sticking with it. But I always have faith. If you produce a quality television show, even if it doesn't hook right away, you're going to get your audience.
Well, according to the numbers, gentlemen, at least here in the American, in the States, where it's playing on FX, it's off to a solid start with 3.43 million viewers for its live +3 ratings measurement from the January 10th premiere. It also drew 1.63 million of that 3.14 strictly here in America in the demographic of 18 to 49, which FX has announced is its most time-shifted series ever in that demographic. It's up 101% for a Tuesday night series, so that's pretty great. In the BBC over in England, it was seen episode 1 by 4.8 million viewers. Now, if you compare that to the other hit BBC shows like Sherlock, which had a show, their season 4 debut at 11.33, and Doctor Who's season 10 at 7.83. That's quite well for BBC, 4.8 million. So you compare that with the FX numbers, and things look pretty good for the series. In fact, it was announced, Stephen Knight, that he came out and said there's not only a season 2 that we can look forward to, but there's also a season 3, Big D, you mentioned?
Well, there was an article in Deadline Hollywood where they had, and this was when the first episode had aired, where they were discussing, how difficult it was to get an entire story into essentially 8 hours of TV. And they had said they had already kind of discussed, and they were floating the idea out there of a second season and a third, that they already had an arc kind of mapped out. So now that they've renewed for season 2, I don't see why season 3 wouldn't be right around the corner. But those ratings are pretty good when you also consider the challenge that this is a show that airs at 10 p.m. Eastern on a weekday. So that's a challenge that most shows don't have, and to be hitting that demographic that strong, I think it bodes well for the series.
So the other TV show that we've reviewed on this podcast so far has been Westworld. Westworld debuted very strong numbers, but then seemed to grow as the season went on. Are you expecting the same things out of Taboo, or do you feel that this is going to be a very niche series, a very specific series, and this may be the highest numbers that we'll receive all season?
I feel like the content in episode 2 was much denser than episode 1. And the speech isn't as easy to understand. Now, I think for an English audience, for a British audience, they have some historical perspective. This is their history after all. And they also, dialect-wise, are going to be a little more keyed in. Obviously, it's a Georgian era dialect, but it's still closer to what they're speaking than it is to what Americans are speaking. I think that they might have an easier time with it, but I know that several people I've talked to have a hard time understanding what's going on dialogue-wise, and I think Westworld, being again from an American background, is easier for us to understand. So I wonder if there will be a sort of a divide across the pond going forward. I don't feel, after seeing this, that it's going to have the same appeal or the same accessibility as Westworld.
Yeah, I don't see this going mainstream. And frankly, gentlemen, I was a little disappointed when I heard that this season or the series wasn't going to conclude after. I thought this was really going to be a limited run series, and everything was going to be wrapped up tightly by the end of the 8 episodes in this season. That does not seem to be the case. Are you disappointed, or are you excited that we'll see this span out over a traditional 3-season arc?
No, I'm not disappointed at all. I think you can tell this specific story, which is the return of James, reclaiming his family legacy, and also figuring out who was behind it. That's a small piece of the story. We still have his entire backstory in Africa, his other adventures. There's a robust story there that they can easily fill 3 seasons, and I'm sure that he's had his hand in a lot of interesting adventures that would make great TV.
Yeah, so we've received some feedback from our audience that has been positive that I just want to give some shout-outs to. The first one is Richard. Richard wrote in with the title Gene's Dark Heart. He was quite happy that, Gene, you were enjoying the show. He gave his 2 shillings. Some of them were the fact that he's loving the atmosphere, the grit, the fact that it's a Poe-esque Telltale Heart similar atmosphere. He's enjoying the dialogue and scenes as they appear to have subtext and malice. He knew that I would be upset because there's no real prospect from romance. Well, maybe some of the Lannister kind. And he's not real sure if James is going to be a protagonist or maybe a Bill the Butcher from Gangs of New York. What are your thoughts on whether or not James is going to be a real protagonist or maybe someone more of an anti-hero?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely seems to be. I don't think he's going to be a Bill the Butcher. I think that increasingly we're seeing that he's got some, detective abilities. I keep going back to that idea that he's kind of more like a Batman. I mean, he's got this dark side. He's obsessive. He's got, the parents are gone. He's got the butler and the creepy house, and that he's got, essentially that if you look back at the origins of Batman, in DC Comics, he was the world's greatest detective, right? That's how he started out. Like he figured stuff out, and he was a tough guy, and he was kind of creepy. And so I see that much more. I do think that he is built out as more of a hero than I anticipated, honestly.
I think he's much more flawed than we saw in episode 1. In episode 1, you gave the analogy of Superman, and he was all-knowing, and that James was coming in, and he already had seen the hands that everyone was playing. In this episode, James is clearly becoming somewhat unhinged. He doesn't know everything. He has a few missteps. He's impulsive, and he's in a city with a handful of people who want him dead, and he's getting drunk, and he's putting himself into dangerous situations. So this was the first time I saw that he was flawed and not as perfect a character as we had thought in episode 1.
Yeah, one of our other listeners, Tracy, who followed us over from the Westworld podcast, also had positive things to say, said she's truly enjoying the show so far. She's loving the setting and historical aspects, as well as, or especially, the East India Trading Company is the big bad. It's brilliant. And she draws analogies from the corporate power, wealth, and inequality she sees in the show to, the political climate today. As for the mystery so far, she thinks it's definitely too early to tell, but there'll be much to learn from the sister and the relationship with James and their father. Brace has Tracy's spider sense tingling. But honestly, if the butler did it, that would probably be too obvious for her. But she's glad that we're doing the Taboo podcast. And then the last one that I want to give a shout out to is Jeff. Jeff wrote in thanking us for the episode 1 that we did on the Taboo pilot. He is worried that the show will lead us to believe that James is a bad man with a dark past, but how dark and how bad remains to be seen. He thinks the question will be answered when we learn what happened on the slave ship, and we definitely learned a lot more about that in episode 2. So thanks everyone who wrote in this week. We have some more questions from the audience that we'll dive into at the end. But the first thing I want to talk about, guys, are some of the new key characters that we saw. So we were introduced to a lot of the main characters in episode 1, but there were some new characters that debuted in episode 2. The first one I want to talk to is the character of Atticus. And Atticus seems to be another Helga, someone that worked with James's father, Horace, sailed with him, and appears to be someone who has his ear to the ground in the town of London, specifically in the area where they live, and he seems to be kind of a mercenary. That's what I took from him. Your thoughts on the character Atticus?
I think my first thought on Atticus is it's a damn shame that he wasn't played by Tom Waits, because this would have been a perfect role for Tom Waits. I would have flipped out, but I like him. I like him in the sense that this was the first time where we saw a guy who looked like he could actually take James on. He looked like like he was kind of cut from the same cloth. That's what I liked about it. What I didn't like about the scene was that this is the first time in the show up until this point where I kind of had to go, whoa, what the hell is going on? I feel like this is where I first got an inkling that the audience might feel that it's a little disjointed, that they don't really get what's going on. Okay, so the horse is missing. Delaney goes looking for his horse. He starts yelling Atticus. Atticus comes out, starts asking him about what the biggest and smallest thing he saw in Africa. And I think you're all right. I could just see people's giant question marks popping up over people's heads, because that's what I was doing.
Well, you mentioned that Atticus seems like the first legitimate threat to James. It's also the first time that we see James unsheath his blade. So James is also, keenly aware that Atticus is someone you don't mess with. So I think he's very intrigued to hear the information that Atticus has. And he has a history, obviously, with Horace and the family. And he seems to have had a good relationship with James. I want to see what comes of this, but that tattoo on his head, that's quite painful.
So it's interesting to note, though, that Atticus does reveal one piece of information that was kind of critical, in the sense that there were people out to kill Horace. So we know that he was poisoned, but also that Atticus was asked to kill Horace and refused. At least he says so. That he would rather kill the man who wants to kill Horace, and later identifies Thorne as the guy who, after seeing him at the reading of the will, he identifies him as the guy who wanted Horace dead. Do you guys believe the veracity of that? I mean, I'm taking him at his word so far. I don't see why not.
Yeah, I don't think Atticus is the kind of guy, especially that would lie to James. I think not only does Atticus know that James means business, but I think also Atticus probably had some sort of fondness for his father, and there's trust there, as long as Atticus is getting paid, right? So I think he will sell information to the highest bidder, and I feel, or at least I felt, the interaction with James and Horace is that he's basically Atticus, not Horace. He's recruiting Atticus to his team. He's someone, he's the first one. If I'm recruiting someone, if I'm building my army, I'm going to go to this guy Atticus, and I'm going to get all his little ears, and I'm going to collect information using his resources. All right, so the next character I want to talk about is Lorna Bow. Lorna seemed to be the only character that actually rattled James the entire episode.
Lorna had all the pizzazz and attitude and screen presence that I wanted from every woman on Westworld. I as soon as I saw this, I go, that's what was missing from Westworld. Like somebody who could just charm you on the screen. So Lorna Bowe, shows up on the scene, and you could tell that James is unsettled. So now we've got two characters that really, have him on edge, but he's very much on edge with her. He gets a little cagey. I noticed that when she's in the room, he's never center stage. He kind of moves from side to side. He's very shifty when she's around. She makes him very uncomfortable. Now, how is she important to the plot? Okay, so she comes in at the reading of the will and claims that she is the widow of Horace, James's father. That doesn't give her a direct claim to the will because James is directly, mentioned in the will. But as the sole heir, if he were to die, then it would fall to the widow.
No, the widow is actually entitled to half of it. She just has to sue for it. Later on, when the conversation is going on with the East India, and they're talking about Lorna, and Hoyt says, we don't even know that she's going to file suit. Yeah, she does have a claim to a portion of it. She does not need James to die. I think it's funny that she used the exact same trick that James does. James comes back in a very public way. He makes his appearance at the funeral so that his claim to the estate is clearly visible to everyone there. I still couldn't tell as the scene went on whether or not I was believing her until we see her alone in Thoit's chamber where she is trying to talk herself up. Much like a scared actress in The Wings, be confident, be confident. She's talking herself through it, which leads me to believe that she is not a legitimate wife to Horace, that she's being put up to it as an actress. She'd be perfect. Do you guys buy her claim? Was she married to James's father?
Well, I don't buy the claim. It seems fishy to begin with. It doesn't seem like the sort of things that Horace would have left out in his communications with James. In addition, she seems to be pulling, like you said, tricks that James has pulled. She knows that James has been to see Helga. So she's got feelers out there too. She's very, very well informed. And it doesn't seem like the play of this, of an actress who was just, whisked away by Horace and fell in love. Also, it's very convenient that the wedding, happened in Ireland and that, of course, the East India is going to be very likely to believe her because that works in their favor.
Well, let me ask you this, guys. So we see James pull out a playbill with her name circled. The feeling that I got is that, yes, Horace has seen a play that starred Lorna, and there must have been some sort of connection. There must have been something there. That was one clue. Then we also see the lawyer speaking to the East India Trading Company, confirming that, yes, indeed, there is proof that she is married to Horace Delaney. So I think this is legit. I think Horace is actually married to her.
Okay, so we're split here in what we believe, but what I took, the biggest piece of information to get away from that entire conversation, is James is asking if she has any other proof, not just correspondence. Do you have anything else? Earlier in the episode, and I hope I'm not jumping around here, but he seems to be searching for the Nunca Sound Treaty that's written on deerskin. And at first, I wasn't sure if he was just testing Brace or he actually didn't have the document. Once he starts asking her about other correspondence, I'm believing that he doesn't have it and he doesn't know where it is, and that's why he's asking her. Am I grasping?
No, I agree. I think that finding the treaty is critical to him, and that he's going to exhaust every avenue until he can find it. Getting back to the playbill, I think it's also important to note that if we're to believe that Horace traveled to Nootka Sound, bought a wife that was James's mother, and that she was native, it's interesting that Lorna Bowe, the character she plays in The Painted Savage, the play, is the Indian princess. So there is again, kind of supporting what Raj believes, there is some sort of parallelism that thinks that maybe that's why he was interested in her. He targeted her because she reminded him of some lost love or something to that effect.
Yeah, it definitely seems that Lorna is the one character that could throw the wrench into all of James's plans, especially if it comes true that she is married to Horace Delaney.
I might be grasping here, but is it possible that Horace had enough foresight to know there was going to be... Well, he wasn't sure if James was alive or not. Could he have enlisted Lorna to come back after his death to try to ensure that his will is actually what he wants his fortune to happen to it, that he's kind of set her up as a last resort to come in, and he sought her out because she was an actress?
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but that's definitely possible.
Because let's just say James doesn't come back. Then the money's going to Zilpha and her husband, and God only knows what they're going to do with it. So it'd be funny if she was a fail-safe. We'll see, but I just want to throw that out there.
So the next character I want to talk about is the character of Godfrey. What do we think of Godfrey?
Godfrey is the source of James's information. In the first episode, we made a comment about there's a look between them, and we weren't sure whether or not he was tipping James off to what the East India's true intentions were. There's no one else who knows. These are state secrets. That Sir Stuart Strange is clear to point out that only the British government and the American government know what's going on. But who else knows? The East India. And who's sitting there listening to everything? So I'm confident now that Godfrey is the source of most James's information.
I do agree. It would explain the glance. And also, who better to give you the information than the scribe? They sit in on every meeting. They're writing everything down. I think it's important that we note we should speak about everybody as their character names, and then also let's give the layman's term for the character too, because if you look at the chatter on Twitter or if you look at the emails that we get in, people be like, "Oh, the writing guy," or whatever. So Godfrey, again, I think Raj, you're doing a great job of this. Is just let's clarify. He's the scribe, so he's around. He's the guy that they tell that's writing down everything that's going on in the meetings.
The next character I want to talk about is Dr. Dumbarton. He is the one American that we've been introduced to in this cast of characters so far. And you might recognize Dr. Dumbarton from House of Cards, as he's played by Michael Kelly.
I really like that you anglified his name already. I think you've been watching the show too much. Dr. Dumbarton. I'd like to say, wasn't it nice to hear an American accent on the show? It was really lovely. I got the sense of what the listeners in the UK feel like when they hear Anthony Hopkins on Westworld. It was just like this. Oh, well, that's nice. So yeah, so Dr. Dumbarton, he's a rough character. He is a man. He has three things. So he's a doctor. He also is proficient in dyeing colors. He says that he's putting color to textiles, because there's war is abundant at this time and people need color for their flags. And his third role is something much more nefarious in that he is a spy. He's a covert operative of the Americans.
So James's interaction with Dumbarton, he's requesting an audience with the President of the United States. He says, I want to speak with the President of the 15 states. If you look in history in 1814, the United States had 18 states. Is there some additional context, or was there something that I missed, or could this have been an error? Because Louisiana was the 18th state, and they joined in April of 1812. Is there some subcontext that I'm missing?
Well, I think there's two things that could be going on there, Big D. One is that, as James enters, he says to Dr. Dumbarton, "I have a wound in my left shoulder. I got it aboard the Yankee prize," and that's the code that they're using to identify each other. And so then, Dumbarton says, "We change the codes all the time. Like, and I'm not falling for that." And at first I wondered if that was like a secondary code, but also you have to remember that there were times, and again, I'm reading The Honorable Company about the East India history, and it could often take 18 to 24 months for news to travel that anything had happened. So often with the English, you would have their missions that the East India would go out on, and there would be treaties signed, and you still had Dutch and British ships blowing each other to bits because they had no idea that the treaty had been signed. It's quite possible that he's just not aware at this time of what's going on in the States, although he does seem keenly aware of the Eastern Seaboard and what's going on in Boston and otherwise. But, James makes every effort to signal to Dumbarton that he's trustworthy, that he can be, that he's a man that, he doesn't have to fear, that he's on the same side. And so he even, talks about where he got his name, that he says he got it, while he was in the Azores. And for those who don't know, again, that was a strategic islands that are midway between the U.S. and England, kind of off the coast of Portugal. So, he's giving them all bits of information that check out. What was interesting to me, though, is that they mentioned the American Secret Society of Correspondence. So I researched everywhere for this thing, and I could not find it. There was a secret society called the Committee of Secret Correspondence that was basically Americans who were abroad trying to get European support for the American cause in the war. And I wonder if that, again, kind of big deal, like you said, if that's just an inaccuracy or just an oversight or what's going on there.
Yeah, so I think at the time, the president was James Madison, and then James Monroe would have been Secretary of State based in London. So I think that James would have a better chance getting in touch with James Monroe than he would with James Madison. But anyway, John Quincy Adams was also involved in the signing of the Treaty of Ghent. Anyway, check it out. All right, the other one I want to talk about, the other character is the Prince Regent, who would later become King George IV, is represented by Mark Gatiss in heavy prosthetics and a fat suit. If you watch or are fans of Sherlock on BBC, he plays Moriarty. He is playing the fat, lazy, slovenly Prince Regent at the time, who is a main character during this era. Quite faithfully. I did some research on this. Yeah, the Prince Regent and later King George was a sloven, obese individual who preferred heavy debts and fashion at the time. What did you think of his portrayal and his connection to this whole story?
Well, he reminded me of my time in the military, when you have that incompetent leader who just lacks having a grasp on a situation. He is more consumed with the colors of X's on a map than he is about the threat to Great Britain. So I disliked him from the beginning. Coop dislikes him. Not someone you'd want to follow into battle. But at least we see that the Prince Regent also has a bit of a disdain for the East India. Coop mentions that the East India is involved, and he says, well, fuck them. And Coop says, that's my intention. So we learned a lot there.
And for listeners, Solomon Coop is basically the royal private secretary. So he was the other guy in the scene with George.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Possibly, I think Prince Regent may have a jealousy for the amount of power that the East India Trading Company has or wields at the time. The last, there's two more things I want to talk about from a character perspective. The first one is Winter. James suggests that Winter is the daughter of the Madam Helga. She's grown up in the care of Helga and is not a prostitute because I don't think Helga wants her own daughter out there prostituting, but she's using Winter as a spy for her and a spy on James. Your thoughts?
Well, is it a spy, though? I mean, it seems like that Winter is informing him. So in the sense that I kind of took her as like an olive branch, that she was reaching out. It was a gesture toward James to say, look, I can help you. Let's work together. And he then reciprocates by visiting her and says, yeah, it's better to work together than separately. Here's where I was a little confused, though. So James goes, Winter talks about the man with the silver tooth that wants to kill James. James then goes to his sloop, gets on board, checks things out, sets it on fire, and jumps off. When James gets back to his boat, Winter's not there.
Right. Is she for real?
That's what I'm wondering. I don't see, when she gets back, it's not like she jumped off and swam away. I mean, they were pretty far out. So
you think he was talking to someone else, like he's seeing ghosts?
That's a possibility. That's the way I took it. It doesn't make sense. Why would this girl go and talk to him, tip him off, and then Helga doesn't seem to want him to even know that she exists or acknowledge that she exists. She says, I don't know anybody like that. I don't know anybody, And so I wonder if James is communicating with a spirit.
Gene, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I think Winter is biracial, right?
Sure.
They use a term that I don't want to use here on the podcast to describe her, right? But, if that's the case, maybe he's seen something from his past. Maybe Winter is maybe a child of his, or maybe someone he encountered during his travels, right? And, she led him, or maybe she drowned in one of the ships and she's leading him, because we see James, and this is pointed out, and I put some pictures here, guys, on screen for you. We keep seeing figures, apparitions in scenes that apparently only James can see, and they're hidden. They're not quite always there, but if you take a screenshot, you can see that in episode 1, when he's talking to the East India Trading Company, if you look more to the left of the screen, there's an apparition outline of a woman. Then in this episode, when he's down there all naked in in his ship that he's just purchased, you see an apparition just above him as he's sitting, and it looks to me that the characters are the mother and the father. It's his mother and then Horace.
That's interesting. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that would make sense if with those two figures. Now, Raj, until you pointed it out, I didn't even notice these things. But now that it did, it makes me love the show even more. The fact that they've got spooks, around on the episode, and kind of like when we talked about, Easter eggs on Westworld, I kind of got sick of them after a while because it was just, there was so much stuff lying around the show. This is much cooler, I think, in the sense that, they're very subtle about it, but it's definitely there. And how I miss that, how, glaring. I mean, it might have been that I was watching it on a 15-inch MacBook screen, but it was kind of crazy that I missed the thing. But yeah, I think that makes perfect sense if he's seeing the spirits of his family. Again, I'm not prepared to say that Winter is a ghost. It was just very strange that she kind of looked very pale as well, and then just like the fact that she was gone when he got back, and he didn't seem to think that was that odd.
My only problem is she provides him with a piece of information that the assassin has a silver tooth. So when James approaches the madam with this piece of information, she unwittingly divulges that she is aware of the Malaysian assassin. So how would Winter provide a figment of James' imagination, knowledge of an assassin that turns out to be real?
Oh, Big D, tut. I didn't say a figment of the imagination, sir. I said a ghost. She's a ghost. So I think, again, I'm not sure. It just seems very odd that she disappeared, and that the reaction by Helga does not seem to indicate, oh yeah, my daughter who I sent to come talk to you. I think I'd like to see what happens there. It's not, again, we're playing detectives here. We're not ready to say either way.
All right. Well, the next topic I want to talk about is the East India Trading Company is definitely trying to kill James. We talked about the Silver-Tooth assassin. We've also talked about there's also scenes in the episode where the chairman of East India, Stuart Strange, is freaking out that James Delaney is still allowed to be walking around alive on the streets of London. Your thoughts on what East India Trading Company is trying to do to James Delaney?
I think they're certainly trying to kill him. Pettifer is the Wormtail from the Harry Potter series. He's told in no uncertain terms by Strange that it's basically he's going to be summarily dismissed from the company if he can't get this done. And I love that Strange is increasingly like looking like this, this bully here, but he makes no bones about it. He's not speaking. What am I looking for? Discretion here. He's flat out saying, I want him dead.
Well, while the East India Trading Company is trying to kill James, he is going around paying his father's debts, as well as starting his new trading company, the Delaney Nootka Trading Company. Why is James doing this?
To me, a lot of what James is doing is so over the top and out in the open. He's making so many enemies that there has to be a logical reason for it. He already has the East India and the Crown questioning his loyalty. He mentioned the United States. He's pitting the U.S. and Great Britain against each other. He claims he's going to start up the shipping business, which is a threat to the East India. He's doing this publicly. He overpays for the ship. He dumps the coins. He's doing everything in a theatrical manner, which will cause people to question his sanity and also question his true motives. Is there anything else that you guys can think of? Why would he be doing this in such a public, open, reckless manner?
There's two big reasons that I observed. The first one is, if you notice, after the reading of the will, he goes and he talks to Atticus and Atticus's henchmen. He's trying to draw out the people responsible for this, right? And so he knows that, kind of where there's smoke, there's fire, where there's blood, there's sharks. You put the money out there, and the people will pop up who are, responsible. So observing, getting to see how people react. The other thing is that he needs to have legal standing, but also witnesses. And so if you create things that will stick out in people's memories, there's a witness. And the more witnesses there are, the less likely it is that you can be buried, right? In the sense that the East India now, people in London have seen him buy the ship. They have seen him, pay out the money. And what's interesting is with the ship, he desperately needs to be able to establish trade on Nootka. Otherwise, he loses claim to Nootka. You have to be able to show that as a functioning, that there's trading going on. Even if it's something silly like furs, it's just got to be something going on. And also generally, some sort of a habitation, a structure that means you actually don't lose claim. It's also the reason why he wants to find the treaty, because the treaty would show that that Nootka was acquired peacefully. That's key, because if it was acquired by force, then the crown could say it was a spoil of war and take the island. So because his father got it under conditions of peace, he needs that treaty to prove it.
The next topic I want to talk about is the Americans. We're finally seeming to get a motive here of why he's going around creating the army. He's paying his father debts. He's going up against the East India Trading Company. Does this explain how James knows so much? Is that he is in cahoots with the Americans and he's just not up to speed on the code with the secret society?
Yeah, it seems that East India believes that about him, but when you get further into the episode, I think that it doesn't pan out in the sense that the Americans don't seem to have any interest. He's trying desperately to get in touch with the Americans. If they had sent him and funded this and all, they would already be supplying him. But it is helpful to him that the East India does believe that there's more at play. This is a much more complex web that gives him a little bit of cover to operate under. So he does seem to admire the American resistance, though, when he's speaking to Thoit. And Thoit's basically saying that the East India controls the land and the sea and the skies above their heads and everything in the world. That they're a God Almighty. And he says there are ships that go to Boston every day and where the East India has no power. And so I do think that he has an admiration or an appreciation for the American experiment and also sympathizes with the Americans.
The next thing I want to talk about is the boat that James buys with this money. Again, I'm going to just call it the Felice because I'm terrible with that last name. But did James know the kind of ship that he was buying, or did he have a hunch that this ship might have been used for different reasons than just a Spanish galleon?
Oh, this is a very specific boat. So the Felice Adventurero, let's say, has been to Nootka Sound. So in 1788, it was there under British flag, and it was it was registered in Macau, so that was a Portuguese colony in China, and then it used Portuguese flags to evade the East India Company monopoly of trading in the Pacific. So if you were a non-British ship, you weren't required to have a license from the East India to operate, right? So this ship was a very specific ship. It's flown. I mean, it's sailed covertly under the nose of the East India. It's been to Nootka Sound, and so I think that he specifically wanted this ship. I don't know that he knew that it had been used. He seems very disturbed by the fact that it was used for slaving, and that sours the experience for him.
Is this a real ship in real life,
Yeah.
or are you okay? Oh wow! So this actually genuinely was a ship.
No, I just pulled 1788 out of my ass.
Okay, I was just making sure. So when he goes into the bottom of the ship, the cargo hold, he seems to reach down where he knows there are secret compartments, pull out a couple shackles, and when he's talking to his lawyer later on, he confirms that hey, the shackles, they were made, but in London. The ship was previously used for East India Trading Company, and there are remnants of beads that the East India Trading Company used when it would visit Tangiers, and it would trade textiles for beads or beads for textiles and slaves. And he seems to break down there. He's pulling up all the beads and then throws them overboard as almost to give them a burial. And then he sees ghosts here. So I think we're on point in saying that James has a very distinct hatred of slavery, does that come from his guilt, or does that come from his experience in seeing it firsthand?
Well, I think that there's a very interesting thing when he gets that when he's in the belly of the Felice Adventurero, and he has this, that moment. I think that we're essentially witnessing a divination ritual that he's trying to discover. He asks, what was this ship? And I think that he's, again, calling on spirits to help him out and figure this out. And then he discovers the shackles. He starts peeling at the floor. But when he has that flashback, the same one that he had when he was in the morgue, and he sees the people underneath the grate on the ship, reaching out to him. This time we hear audio from it, and they yell, "Captain," like they're asking him for help. And so I wonder if this is sort of like an Amistad situation where it was, like he led some sort of a mutiny that went awry. It doesn't seem like he was complicit in enslaving, at least in this flashback.
One of the things that he does is he takes off his shirt, he gets naked, and then he also carves a bird onto the floor of the cargo hold. I took a screenshot of it, and I posted here on the screens, guys. That bird that he carved looks similar to the tattoo on the top of his middle back. I tried to do a reverse Google image search, and I couldn't find anything. What is that?
I got that, Raj. I got that. So it looks to me like an African petroglyph that's it's called the Sankota, which represents learning from the past and building the future. And so it seems like again that this might be thematic for what what his mission is, or what he's pushing forward, but it's not exact. I mean, but I've seen there are different depictions of it. And it seems to be the key points of it is that it is a bird figure and it is looking backward. So it's learning from the past and building the future.
That would make a lot of sense. So, do we think that he's actually going to use this boat to establish a company, or do you think that he was just using it as a prop to understand and solve this mystery of who killed his father?
The only reason he would start the trading company is if he was looking to become wealthy. Money is not an issue for him. I think his intentions go much higher.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Big D, though, because, again, he has to, as part of his claim on Nutke, he would have to actually engage in some sort of commerce there.
Yes, exactly. So he could easily set up what boils down to a shell corporation. He has a ship, he's got a building, he's got a couple employees. If the question is he truly going to set up a shipping company and actually run it for the purpose of being a shipping company? I don't buy that. It does legitimize his claim to the land, and I think that's all he's looking to do.
Yeah, it kind of felt to me that he bought a piece of evidence that he knew would help him with his case in finding out what's really been going on since he's been away. Anything else on the Felice Adventurero?
Just one point to the historical accuracy of this too. People say, well, could they have engaged in slavery under the nose of the East India without East India even knowing about it? The East India did a very thorough screening process for their employees, or what they called factors, and so they would actually have to fork over at times a bond. So it would be like, you'd pay £500 bond in order to work for the company. And that way, if they found out that you were stealing or doing any sort of illicit activity, they could then take that bond. There's a financial incentive to play by the rules. Nobody played by the rules. Essentially, they would screen people for like the highest moral caliber. They would make a financial incentive and everything. But what happened was, you get out there, you're far from the control, and there's all this money to be made. And, if your ship is 6 or 8 months late, that could be the wind. It's so once they got out there, all sorts of stuff was going on. And so it was perfectly normal to, take a legit cargo to one spot and then maybe pick up some slaves and take them to another spot. And nobody's the wiser, and you pick yourself up a nice profit.
Yeah. Like if I'm going from Tangiers to, say, Trinidad, I'm going to get a side hustle going on. Is that what you're saying?
Bingo.
Speaking of side hustle, the last topic I want to talk about is the connection that James has with his half-sister. We previewed this in our first episode recap last week of the whole incest situation and how that might be the reason for the name title Taboo. I've been reading up on some message boards and some Reddit. There's a subgroup there, and there's also one that I'm part of on Facebook. It seems if people are kind of comparing this to the Simpsons did it first situation with Taboo and Game of Thrones, where people seem to be, hey, haven't we already done this? What do you think of this scene that James has with his sister outside, where they got dangerously close to each other and there was a lot of sexual tension? Are we on board with this incest storyline? Do we still think it's an incest storyline? And if so, is it okay that shows like Game of Thrones and Taboo keep shepherding this forward?
I think that this is a different scenario altogether from Game of Thrones, in the sense that, first of all, they're half brother and half sister, and secondly, we're not even sure of that at this point. This is only the what we're told. I mean, much like James's brother that's being kept safe. We don't know that that's actually a brother, or if it's again, like so many people have said, this is James and Zilpha's son. Who knows? We also haven't established for certain that they've copulated, or in the sense that they he may just like be in love with his sister, and she would never accept that.
You honestly believe that? There's no doubt. You could feel the sexual tension, and it wasn't just from James to Zilpha. You can see that she's hot and bothered. She says, "I can't stand to be this close to you." That was not she was afraid. She would do something that she couldn't, undo. She's in a public place. She left the room because she knew if she had this encounter in front of people, she couldn't hide her true feelings. And the straighten your skirt when you march away. I know you went over earlier with me that there's some other meanings behind it, but they have copulated, and she has straightened her skirts as she marched away from James in the past.
All right, Big D, but here's the thing. Let's remember again historically here. We're talking about the Georgian era. We're talking about a shipping magnate and his two children. People didn't just bone randomly when they had money back in the Georgian era. Like there was protocol. There was a value to keeping your you don't think Thorne would have thought it weird that she wasn't a virgin when he married her? I'm not sure that I bought this. It was uncommon for teenagers to just have sex casually, much less with your brother or sister.
Okay, so you're buying into the fact of an intact hymen is a demonstration of virginity. You can break a hymen riding a bicycle. She could have been riding a horse. We don't know that that Thorne popped her cherry. We don't know that.
What? What? Mouth of a sailor on you.
So regardless of that, though, let's examine what she says back to James. Though he says, "You used to straighten your skirt and walk away," and she replies, "Who walked away?" I think that if she was in fact his lover or even a romance, he left, abandoned her, and that set in motion the distance between the two of them. As he returns, I think that. When he left, because they also, they say that, in episode 1, he says to her, "That's one thing that Africa did not cure me of." Two things implied by that statement. One of them being that he was sent to Africa for something that needed to be cured, some affliction. And then the second was, that he left and she was not necessarily in agreement with him leaving or even aware that he was going to leave.
No, they totally boned. They totally boned.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely think they boned, but is she in on the assassination attempt? Because right after they leave that highly sexualized tension scene with Mozart Symphony 6, moving up to crescendo, right after he leaves her, he gets stabbed during that assassination. Do you think that she ordered that? Do you think that she's part of the Thorne hit?
I'm a romantic at heart, and I don't want to believe that she would have anything to do with it.
An incest romance at heart?
Hey, don't put labels on love, okay?
Put labels on love.
Okay, you already mentioned you're from Florida. In the South, some funny things go on.
Oh, listen, I got crushes on all my cousins.
So, when the reading of the will comes out, and Thorne openly threatens James's life, Zilpha's like, "Come on, let's go. She seems to be okay with the will, much more than Thorne is. So I really have to hope she is not behind it. She does seem to have an affinity for her brother. So I just hope it doesn't go that way.
What about the diamond that she receives? She seems when she gets the correspondence, she seems very excited to open it, but also very quick she knows exactly where to put that thing. Like she knows exactly to hide it and quickly. Is that from James? If it is from James, is she expecting these regularly?
That's definitely from James. That rock, how many of those rocks do you think were floating around London at that point? That the timing of it and that James had just put it out there, I think he's giving his sister, his half-sister, something to fall back on. He knows that they're having some form of money problems and she's not included in the will, but we're not led to believe there's more coming.
Is there anything else that we know to talk about when it comes to the Zilpha and James storyline? All right, those are all the topics that I had for this episode.
Can we take 30 seconds to talk about the stabbing?
Oh, you have to.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because this is the first time we get to see James at work. And if I'm correct, the attacker was disguised as a woman but was a dude coming down the street, springs it on him. And James does, from what it looked like to me, he, in one motion, or two motions maybe, slits the back. I don't know if it was his hamstrings or slits his Achilles from the back, and then cracks the dude's neck, and then bites out his jugular vein. And like it was fantastic. I've been wondering this whole time, like, when is he gonna burst? When is it gonna happen? And I thought it was a very satisfying a scene, but he does get stabbed in the process.
Yeah, upon first watching, I was amazed at his proficiency. I said, finally, James is showing us, what he's capable of. I wasn't expecting biting out the throat, but is there a chance that he was tipped off? Could he have responded that quickly?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he has, from what we understand, he lived among the natives. He lived a very tribal life. His instincts are one of great defense. Listen, in a back alley in London, you had to be armed at all times. You had to be waiting for that. And you could tell. He could tell. I mean, even if you didn't have the same spider sense that James has, you definitely knew something was going to go down. I think his reaction is of years of being in environments where he had to protect himself.
Was he gutted? Is he hit in the gut?
Oh, yeah. The knife is in him. When he slumps against that wall, the knife is in his belly.
Yeah, we know from this time period, he's in trouble. He better go find Dumbarton and hope he is a damn good surgeon, because his likelihood of surviving that type of wound in that time period is not very good.
Gentlemen, I'm going to be the first man to go tinfoil hat on this podcast. We've gone 2 weeks. We almost made it through 2 episodes, but here we go.
Put on your tinfoil top hat.
Ladies and gentlemen, tinfoil top hat's on. Okay, we know that Zilpha has asked James, did he really eat flesh? We know that that's the rumor, that he eats flesh. He does not bite out this man's throat until after he is stabbed. He has already incapacitated the guy. He broke his neck. He cut the back of his leg so he couldn't run. And it seems to me this bite is an attempt at a regenerative process, that he is trying to self-heal by biting through this man's neck and consuming his flesh.
Okay, I've heard this. There is a segment of people watching this show that have a similar theory that James Delaney is a vampire.
Well, he goes out in the daytime, though.
Yeah, he is biting people's flesh and regenerating through biting their necks. They say he's a vampire. Now, there's another segment of the population that believe he is a voodoo doctor or practices voodoo and eats flesh for regenerative powers. Are you saying that he's a witch doctor and that's why he's able to see spirits?
If he's a vampire, this is my new favorite show of all time, but I don't think that's the case. No, I think that he's definitely indicating that, because immediately after he consumes the flesh, he slumps against the wall. I think most people with a dagger in the gut like that, you're done for. And he is scarred up. He's pretty scarred up. And then what does he see as his sight is his eyes are kind of flitting? He sees a man with a spear, presumably in Africa, approaching him and looking, kind of searching into the camera. To me, it seems like something else is at play here.
Yeah, there's definitely something else at play here.
It could be why he wears that long trench coat in the daylight, so we can't see his skin sparkle.
That's right. If he starts jumping and running on treetops, we are going to lose. I'm going to come. I'm going to orgasm.
I mean, if that's the case, then why doesn't he just glamour Zilpha and then everything will be fine?
That's right.
Because he wants her to truly love him.
You have to invite them inside. That's what you have to do.
I think she already did.
Straighten skirts. Speaking of straightening skirts, we do have a couple emails that I do want to read here on air. If you have an email, if you have a suggestion or a question or a review or a topic of something that you want to read, please email us. We're hosts at shatontv.com. This email comes from Marcus. Marcus T., one of our listeners from the Westworld podcast. He writes in, guys, I absolutely love Taboo episode 1. It was very dark and very weird. The X-Files and Tales from the Dark Side, good kind of weird. The first episode gave you just enough story for you to follow, but in my opinion, it was all about the tone and mood of the story. Yes, I agree that it is a murder mystery, but the plot revolves more about why than the who. They let you know off the bat that James Delaney is not a good guy. I think the story may let us know that maybe James Delaney is a villain and not a hero. Maybe he's just trying to tie up loose ends before his karma is cashed in. It's way too easy for the East India Trading Company to be the big bad villain. Clearly the big questions, though, however, are, number 1, what happened in Africa? Number 2, what happened when he was under the command of Sir Stuart Strange? Number 3, who is the boy? And number 4, what is the relationship between he and his sister? I like all the directions so far the show is going in, and I am on board. Keep up the good work, fellas. That comes from Marcus. So, guys, you want to comment on some of the big questions? The what happened in Africa, what happened under the command of Stuart Strange, who is the boy, and what is the relationship between he and his sister? What do we want to tackle?
Well, I think Africa was certainly a transformative experience for James. He's a very different man from the people that he's seen in around London, and his interaction with Atticus, I think, reinforces that idea that he has seen things that, as we've said before, people in this time, in this world, it was very, they had very small lives as far as their geographic reach. Interestingly, though, I liked what was said about this being maybe not necessarily a whodunit, but a whydunit. Kind of tracing what happened here and what were the motivations behind Horace dying, behind Nootka Sound and everything else that's going on. I think that's a great observation.
Yeah, talk about James being a hero. I think he's a flawed character who has had a very dark past. I think he knows that he has to make amends for things that he has done, and he tells Strange, I know the evil you've done because I was part of it. And I hope that the overall story arc goes to redemption for him and righting the wrongs. I hope it's not just a simple murder mystery for money, and it's, in the end, the intentions of whoever it is that's trying to profit off of this is less interesting to me as a good redemption story for James.
Thanks, Marcus, so much for writing in. Our next email comes from Carol. Carol from Brazil writes in. She says, I'm currently listening to Shat on TV Taboo FX. I feel like we're all in the same darkness in terms of what's happening in the show as is natural in the beginning. However, I agree with you, Gene and Raj, about Tom Hardy. I've been following his work for a long time, and I can attest that he's playing a role that is very similar to previous ones, but I wouldn't go too far to say that he's playing Tom Hardy. For those who watch Bronson, know that rage and rawness come very naturally in Tom Hardy's acting, but his work also includes other interesting roles like in Locke, Rock'n'Rolla, and Stewart, A Life Backwards, a movie with him and Benedict Cumberbatch that I highly recommend. I like these Tom Hardy acting idiosyncrasies of him being aggressive and crazy, but I'm hoping he doesn't let them overshine the story because his character will need intelligence to outsmart his enemies in the next upcoming episodes. Otherwise, we'll just be one nude scene away from seeing Bronson again. Well, I think that's it for now. I just want to say you have a big fan from Brazil. That's lots of love from Carol. What do you think about Tom Hardy's acting chops, guys?
Well, Carol, I was going to point out earlier, actually, that we really got to see a different side of him when Lorna came onto the scene, in the sense that his pace changes, his locomotion changes, he becomes uncomfortable, and these are all subtle things that he's doing that are much more of a depth of a character than he displayed in Bronson or Batman. I liked seeing that he's doing different things there, and also again that his I think his illness or his whatever's haunting him, the way he plays off that, it does reveal a certain vulnerability, that he's not just an aggressive madman, but he's kind of pulling in some of that character from Mad Max, where it's not all is right in his head. I think that there's a lot more going on there, and the patter of the dialogue between him and other people does show a very keen intelligence, that he's clever. He even seems to make what would be the closest thing James Keziah Delaney could make to a joke a couple times when he's speaking with Atticus.
Carol, thank you so much for writing in. Our next email comes from Tom P. Tom P. writes in, "Hey guys, if you're reading this on the podcast, thanks. Clearly Nootka will play out as a major part of the story, so it seems right to start asking questions. We know that the East India leadership, presumably the court of directors, are closely aligned with the crown. Ownership is valuable because the crown will either protect it or pay them a lot for it. Train travel in the Northeast U.S. started around 1810, so they may be speculating on transcontinental travel, which didn't happen until 1869. But also, why that particular place, since there are numerous other sounds on Vancouver Isle? I just can't figure out why James would refuse to sell, since he knows this will end in a fight. Sir Strange said as much in episode 1. Modern methods didn't work. If he isn't doing this out of spite, he must see a greater value, but under the law at that time, you had to have had established occupancy in order to lay claim, even though it was sold to his father, who had the authority to do so. So while he was in North America, Strange's lackey said this when he recounted Delaney's travels, did he travel there and establish a settlement? Did his father establish something we don't know about? Didn't they mention a company factory, some sort of office? And what's the paper establishing ownership worth with a war raging and the U.S.-Canada border being negotiated? Couldn't either side simply take the land away? Maybe James struck a deal with the Americans and they'll protect him. I could go on, but I'll stop there. And this comes from first-time writer, long-time listener, Tom in Chicago.
So we had questioned last episode whether or not he could have potentially been actually to the Nootka Sound or had been to the United States, been to America. In this episode, whether or not you believe that Winter is a figment of his imagination, a spirit, an apparition, she tells James that her greatest goal, she wants to go to America. He says, where would you like to go, Boston or New York? He says it in a matter of just kind of in a way that I took he had been to both places. He had an intimate knowledge of America. It was not someone saying, hey, I'll go there with you, let's go. He was giving her an option. So if he has been there, has set up some form of occupancy, completely believable, and I expect it to be what we will find.
Thanks, Tom, so much for writing in. The last and final email, it's more of a shout-out. It comes from Marty M. Marty wrote in, Dear Raj, Dick, and Gene, here are designs for the Shat on TV East India Company t-shirt. I have supplied the vector file for printing as well as a JPEG with a black background plus a t-shirt mock-up. Let me know what you think. I'm happy to tweak it. All the very best, your friend on Sky, Marty. And I gotta say, it looks pretty badass. It's the East India Company logo, the three crosses and a triangle with SOTV in a similar font. The design looks really cool. We'll post it up on the website and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We'll gauge whether or not maybe we do a limited run of shirts or put this on a coffee mug or something like that. I don't know, something we haven't done. Or maybe a sticker for people who write into the Shat on TV River Rant for Taboo. But anyway, Marty, thank you so much for writing in. Thanks for sending us the file. That's all the emails that came in for episode 1. If you do want to write in, please do so either via Facebook, Twitter, or our direct inbox or hosts at shatontv.com. If we get enough, we'll do a separate episode, similar to what we did with Westworld, and just do a standalone response to all of our fans' emails. that's all I had on the agenda. Gentlemen, is there anything we need to talk about for episode 2 before we shut down and get ready for episode 3?
Yeah, I'd just like to do 2 quick shout-outs off of the website, shatontv.com. Just if you'd like to get a shout-out from us, go on shatontv.com. There'll be just a little slide-in that says get a shout-out, and you can give us your email address to receive all sorts of updates from us, and we will give you a shout-out. So this week's shout-outs go out to Tanya and Delaney. Oh, you're a clever one, Delaney. I see what you did there. Anyway, thanks for visiting the website. Again, we've got tons more stuff up there, all the back episodes, all of our Westworld stuff, Westworld Telegraph from people who wrote in, and we'll be posting also the letters and emails in regarding Taboo on shatontv.com.
That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Taboo Edition. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, at Shat on TV. We're also on Facebook. Like us there. Search for Shat on TV Podcasts. Again, that website that Gene mentioned is shatontv.com. You can check our entire backlog, archive, join conversations on individual episodes. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by, leave a 5-star review. That really helps the podcast grow. And be sure to share on your social media. Also, you can check out our store on our website for cool Shat on TV merchandise. It helps keeps the light on. We have very limited remaining shirts of our Westworld items. Be sure to check that out. And we might do something for Taboo here. You can also check us out over at Shat the Movies, shatthemovies.com, and everywhere fine podcasts. We review 80s, 90s movies and see if they hold up. We most recently reviewed Rocky IV and The Last Starfighter, and this week I think the winner so far is Commando, if I'm not mistaken, so that will probably be the most recent one. We release every Thursday for Shat the Movies. On behalf of my 2 co-hosts, Big D and Gene Lyons, I'm Roger Roper. Be sure to join us next Tuesday for our Taboo FX release. Thanks so much for joining. We'll see you then, I guess. Thanks for listening.